I'm a 26-year-old female. I live with my fiance and my 2 cats and my dog, Rowan. Our house is literally less than a minute away from a huge farmer's field that is frequented by many dog walkers at all times of the day. Me and my significant other often take turns walking Rowan around the field throughout the day. It was only around 7:30 p.m. and it was still really bright and sunny. Rowan was letting me know that it was time to go for a walk, so while my partner was tinkering in the garage, I grabbed his leash and headed to the field. Let me quickly tell you about Rowan. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who is very loving and playful, if a little daft, but he wouldn't hurt a fly. There's not a bad bone in his body. He is also extremely well trained, and we made sure to put the effort in as he's a big dog breed with a bad rep, so we wanted to make a point of not feeding stereotypes. I'm very much of the opinion of there's no bad dogs, just bad owners. Unfortunately, we've had some run-ins with some not so good dog owners, so Rowan gets a little nervous when he meets new dogs and people, but we're working on it. Anyway, back to the story. We're walking around the farmer's field. Rowan is off sniffing and peeing on every blade of grass in sight. I always keep an eye out for other walkers anyway due to Rowan being a little nervous, and I clocked a guy on his own walking down the path towards me fairly far away. At first I thought nothing of it, as plenty of people walk this route without dogs. We were just kind of getting into lockdown in the UK though. As the guy got closer, I noticed he was in a full tracksuit with the hood up, which was odd because it was like 23 degrees, so shorts and t-shirt weather. He then took a small path off the field leading through some bushes. It was a public-made shortcut rather than an official public footpath, but it was well enough used, so I kept walking, thinking nothing of it. At about 15 meters away from the path he took, Rowan shot back to my side immediately, dropping the mouthful of dirt he had been pretending not to eat. He's not the brightest. I petted him and noticed that he was standing super alert, staring at the path entrance. When I looked up, I caught a glimpse of the man peeking around the edge of the bushes that had concealed the entrance. I stopped dead on my tracks and Rowan's fur was stood on end as he positioned himself in front of me. It took me a second to realize that this man had been watching and waiting in the bushes for me to approach. My current route would have meant that I would be walking right by the path's opening. My stomach dropped as I realized we were the only ones around on that field. I had this weird moment where I was almost trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, but then the guy whistled. Not a wolf whistle, but as if to try and get my dog to come to him. Rowan was having none of that though, and I definitely took it as my cue to trust my stranger danger instincts. I immediately turned and sped walked back the way that we came, while simultaneously pulling my phone out and dialing my partner's number. I ended up having to clip on Rowan's lead to get him to walk with me, and he was not taking his eyes away from the path. He was even growling a little, which was so out of character and put me on edge even more. I glanced back and the man had edged slightly out of the bushes, watching me walk away. My partner answered the phone after a few rings. I was only halfway through stammering out the story and he was already sprinting up to the field to meet me, telling me to stay on the phone but keep an eye on the man. The man in the tracksuit now fully came out of the bushes and just stood staring at me, walking away. I dared a quick look away from him towards the entrance to the field, to see my fiance jogging towards me. He was relieved that I was okay, but was also immediately pointing and shouting, "Is that him?" Clearly furious at what this man might have had in mind, had Rowan not picked up on him hiding in the bushes. I eventually convinced my fiance not to confront him, as he was still stood staring, almost taunting us. You never know what people might be capable of or have concealed. We came off the field and took Rowan on a different walk, which he was more than happy about. I'd never been so proud of Rowan for stepping up and protecting me. Safe to say, he got plenty of treats and fussing when we got home. So, creepy man in the bushes, let's not meet. I've had a stalker for over 2 years. I'm a 27-year-old female and have worked with people with disabilities since I was 19. I was born with a rare genetic condition and have been using my experience as a radical disability activist and advocate to help other people with disabilities in my community. During my time working in the disability community, I have been sexually harassed and assaulted several times by both men and women. When I first started working with the organization, I was working with my best friend's older brother, her older sister, and several of her aunts, uncles, and cousins. So in the beginning, I always felt safe. Like people would do anything to keep the creeps away from me. They would have. However, after several years, all my close friends slowly started leaving. Flash forward to a couple of years ago, when most of my closest friends were all gone, leaving me one of the most experienced and senior staff members, including all of the management and the board of directors. I've had a lot of bad experiences in these past 2 years, with the stuff stated above, but the worst part has been the lack of support from management. So, within the last few years, a client that we'll call Leonard, a male in his 50s, started to chat with me at community events. We often have parties or events that we invite the entire community to. From the very first moment that I met Leonard, I experienced chills creeping up and down my spine. Something about the way that he looked at me has always made me super uncomfortable, to the point that I'll do literally anything to get away from him, including helping folks in the bathroom. He's a really short white guy with shocking white hair and these clear blue eyes that are just empty. He's always really smiley and soft-spoken. He started off innocent enough. He would corner me at parties and talk until I found a reason to slip away. But at some point, he managed to get my personal cell phone number from a coworker, I still don't know who, and started calling me late at night and leaving long, rambling messages. I never answered the phone, and after a while, he stopped. He would still periodically call me though, despite me asking him politely in person to stop. He started cornering me in the office too, when no one was around, so I had a difficult time getting away from him. Every time that he cornered me, he would grab my arm or shoulder so I couldn't leave. More recently, like during the lockdown, he started calling the office and leaving messages on my work phone after hours. He wasn't even someone that I personally worked with. I asked my coworker who did work with him to please ask him to stop, and which she did. She spoke to him several times, but he would only ever stop for a week or two, and he always made a point to come and apologize directly to me, which almost always made me more uncomfortable. It started to get really bad about 3 weeks before I started working from home. He would forget his appointments, which were purposefully set on the one day in the week when I wasn't working in the office. He would come in the next day when he knew that I was working, and then he figured out when I got off, and would come in to meet with my coworker right before I got off work and to wait around until my shift ended. He started giving me little gifts, which I always refused. Every time he would get really offended, so then he started writing me poetry. Instead of just handing it to me, he would grab me and read over my shoulder and point out what every single line meant. I always tried to get other coworkers to help me, but no one saw anything as weird or bad or unsafe, despite the warning bells going off in my head. And then one day he cornered me and said he wanted to take me to the train station, because I usually walked. I asked him if he meant he wanted to walk me the 2 blocks. He shook his head and said, "No, I want to take you in my car so I can keep a better eye on you." It gave me instant chills. I told him no, but he kept insisting that it would happen before he finally left. I'm a tiny petite person, so the idea that he was following me long enough to know exactly which train station that I went to, and the line that I got on. There are several different lines going in several different directions, and even the direction that I was going really freaked me out. Enough to double up on the defensive measures I normally keep on me, including pepper spray and a taser. I told everyone. I told supervisors, HR, the associate director, everyone that I could think of. I had meetings with my direct supervisors where I explained everything that happened and why he was giving me the creeps. but they all just brushed me off, and one manager in particular said I was being too dramatic. He was just a sweet older man, doing nothing to harm anyone. Until the next time he came around. I told a couple of my coworkers, J and P, a 28-year-old male and a 26-year-old male, and they both agreed that one of them would always walk me out from now on. On cue, Leonard waited around until after I got off, but J and P, who said they had looked out for me, were both super busy, so the associate director said he would walk me out, still not believing that it was a big deal. We started walking and chatting like old friends, and the whole time, Leonard followed us. The associate director had to literally yell at him to finally get Leonard to leave. Right then, he finally realized how serious the situation was getting. The next day, one of the managers, who was super rude and dismissive about the whole situation, pulled me into her office and profusely apologized. After, Leonard was yelled at and went back to the office. The manager had a conversation with him that really creeped her out on my behalf. Apparently he was saying things like, "My relationship with me is ours and has nothing to do with the organization. You have no right to tell me how to behave around me. She likes me and likes what I'm doing. I'm not making her uncomfortable. She needs me to watch out for her." That same day, the entire management team apologized for not taking immediate action. Especially since this is not the first time stuff like this has happened to me. I just asked that from now on, I have absolutely no contact with him. I reiterated several times that I absolutely do not want an apology. I want nothing. Since then, I've learned that Leonard has harassed and assaulted an old coworker who had to file a restraining order against him. This was told to me by the manager who originally dismissed my claims. She had dealt with the other situation, yet nothing was told to any of the other staff about this behavior. And not only that, she berated me in front of other staff for speaking out about my experience, saying that it wasn't that big of a deal, even though she knew he had done it before. If I never have to see that guy again, I will be eternally grateful. The situation was never fully resolved before lockdown. I'm very thankful I've been able to work from home, but I'm not sure how to proceed after restrictions are lifted, and I have to start going back out again. I was thinking about filing a restraining order. My husband and family really want me to, but I pretty much figured out that no one will take me seriously. So, I used to be a security officer at a homeless shelter earlier this year. I worked there for 5 months before leaving. Before I really begin, I have tons of creepy and scary stories from my time there. So back in March, I was at work doing what I needed to do. On the ground floor was a daytime-only homeless shelter, and on the top was a government homeless outreach office. This is who my contract was through. But I had to keep the entire building secure even though the shelter was a different organization. The government office was the mental health branch, so it wasn't uncommon for crazy people to, well, act crazy. This particular day, an individual came up to pick up his medication. The man took the medication, walked over to the couch that sits in the office. The place is laid out like a doctor's office, and I was posted in the lobby. After sitting down, the guy starts digging through his backpack and pulls out a bag full of white pills. This instantly catches my attention. He grabs his pocket knife, doesn't open the blade, and smashed 3 or 4 pills. Uses his hand to make the dust into 3 lines. Then he snorts all the dust up. What remained he swept and flung off the table. This is now considered to be acting hostile and potentially illegal. So I walk over and start trying to ask the man to leave. He keeps telling me, I gotta take my meds. I inform him that he needs to leave some more, and then he says out loud without looking at me, "You know, I got a suppressed 9mm in my bag. That'll make you and that receptionist shut up." Alarm bells start ringing. I know I have a potentially active shooter scenario in my hands, and I'm an unarmed officer. I calmly walk backwards to the receptionist and whisper her to get the other client up, call 911, and go lock herself in an exam room and to not open the door. She does this as well as informs the other caseworkers of the situation, and they all lock and barricade the doors. There are cameras in the lobby, so this was all recorded and turned over to the police. After many other attempts to get the man to leave and informing him that the police were called and en route, he gets up, gets in my face and tells me quietly, "I'm coming back for you one day," and then storms out. The police arrive 5 minutes later. They examine the footage, put out a APB on the man, and take samples of the powder left on the table. A few days later, I'm informed that the man was found with no guns and no drugs, that the powder turned out to be an antipsychotic medication. He had allegedly lost the bottle that came in. Nothing bad happened, but still, as a 19-year-old unarmed security guard, it scared the crap out of me. For those curious, I still work for the same company. I now work third shift in a completely different location. So to the crazy homeless dude that threatened me with a silenced 9mm, let's not meet again. And I hope you aren't still thinking about seeing me again. This happened a long time ago, but a similar post made me think of this horrific experience that I had in my early 20s. My friend and I went into a JCPenney's, a store for clothes, kitchen items, jewelry, etc., for her to exchange a package of onesies for her infant daughter. We both had our toddler sons, sitting facing each other in a tandem stroller. After being in the store for a few minutes, they both started tugging back and forth on the package of onesies, the correct size my friend needed to exchange the originals for. I grabbed the package from them and threw it into the compartment under the stroller, ending the game of tug-of-war. My friend did a little more shopping. The boys did some more fighting and whining. She exchanged the onesies and cashed out the rest of her items. We left that store, got lunch in the food court, let the babies play in the play place, and grabbed coffee, ready to head out. As we received our coffees, a security officer approaches me and asks me what I stole. Completely dumbfounded, I tell him that I didn't steal anything. He tells me that he has me on video stealing, and if I confess, he'll go easy. I tell him that he's wrong. He can check my purse as I have nothing. He immediately pulls the package of onesies from the bottom of the stroller. Amidst our toddler screaming, she didn't notice that I put the package at the bottom of the stroller, and she had grabbed another. She didn't pay attention because she bought other things, and I was trying to keep the boys from poking each other in the eyes. I tell the security guard that it wasn't intentional, and explain how the boys were grabbing on it, to which led to my throwing it to the bottom of the stroller. He goes on a rant on how he's heard every excuse in the book, and that I'm just making it worse for myself. So I bring up the timeline and ask, why if I intended to steal, for an infant that isn't mine by the way, why would I stay for lunch, let the kids play, and calmly sit down to have coffee? My friend also confirms that she has the infant daughter, and yes, the boys were annoying each other during our shopping trip. This apparently made the security guard upset, because he went to full-on commando mode, pulling me by the arm back to JCPenney's and into the security room. We get inside and I urge him to watch the security tape again, figuring it'll see the babies fussing and understand the confusion. He leaves me in the room for 45 minutes, to which I figure he had to have seen the babies fussing and fighting. Nope, he had come back in and he calls me a liar. He says it clearly showed me shoplifting, and he goes to call the cops. I'm frustrated, but I agree to the cops being called, because I figure they'll see the tapes and understand the mistake. He didn't like this either. He tells me that once the cops get involved, that he is required to call Child Protective Services, which will immediately open a case, and that they will have to take my son into custody until I have a court date. Keep in mind, I'm 23 at the time, and I've never been in a situation like this before, so I believed his lying ass. I break down crying, telling the guy that I'm being honest. I'm not a thief, I have a clean record. Why would I steal clothes for a child that isn't mine? He was cold. He told me the most innocent looking people are the ones who steal. He started every excuse and lie that you can think of. And I have 3 minutes to confess before he calls the cops and has my son taken away from me. I still insisted my innocence, because I was, and I begged for a manager. Bear in mind, my friend was outside the whole time with my son and hers, unbothered other than worrying about me. The security guard leaves and comes back 10 minutes later. No manager, but with a paper, which is basically a generic written confession, saying I shoplifted in the amount of $6.99, literally under $10, and that I agreed to pay restocking fees, loss and prevention fees, and to not enter the store for 3 years. Now I'm hysterically crying, pleading with him that I did nothing wrong. I'm not a shoplifter. The only thing I did was exercise poor judgment by not specifying to my friend that the onesies were on the bottom. He tells me that he has no sympathy for liars or thieves, and had already called the cops and they're on their way to arrest me and to take my son, unless I sign the paper. And so I panic, quickly sign the form, to which he releases me. I tell my friend, she drove, to hightail it out of the mall ASAP. After telling the story to her in the car, and other people later, I found out that it was all BS. The security guard had lied and manipulated me, and should have lost his job for that. But he was so far in my head that I didn't want to revisit the situation for even a second. It's been over a decade since this had happened, and I still get anxiety just thinking about it. So, rookie mall security guard, let's not meet again, ever.